1944 in review. The Mutual Network presents its annual summary of the news of the year, featuring from its file of historic recordings the voices of General Eisenhower, General MacArthur, President Roosevelt, King George of England, Thomas E. Dewey. The actual sounds of history in the making. Sounds and voices as they were broadcast over Mutual during the last 12 months. 1944 in review. Tonight, our narrator is one of America's most distinguished radio reporters, the director of WOR's War Services and News Division, Dave Driscoll.
We've passed another year in this global war for the freedom of the human soul, and it's time once more to look at the scoreboard. The score is in our favor. Where in 1943 we shifted from the defense to the offense, this year we carried the fight to the enemy and began slugging toward final victory. Tonight, the GI boots of American infantrymen are treading the so-called sacred soil of Nazi Germany. General Douglas MacArthur has returned to the Philippines. American forces have pushed northward up the Italian boot to the Alps. The Balkans have crumbled. The bombing of Tokyo is no longer a miracle, and the army of the Soviet Union is closing in on Czechoslovakia and Austria. The price we have the limits of the human mind.
I paid part of that price. I've lost 2 sons.
I paid part of it. I've been torpedoed 5 times at sea. Ever try swimming in water covered with burning oil?
You can count me in. I own a plant that converts scrap paper into food containers. I worked 18 hours a day, and then I broke down. They say my heart won't last another 6 months.
Part of that price was on me. I'm a doctor in the Army at a battalion aid station where the wounded kids keep coming in and coming in.
I was in Rotterdam when the Luftwaffe came over.
I was in a concentration camp. They lined us
My
up.
brother is in the Stalag Luft 3.
All of these people have paid a price. So have you and I and the hundreds of millions of citizens in the United Nations. But one of the greatest facts in the story of 1944 is the fact that we have probably paid only half of the bill for victory. There is more to come, much more. Your understanding of the events of 1944 will be clearer if you will keep in mind what might be called the 1944 timetable. Time was indeed the priceless asset for which fascism fought. Our timetable called for the defeat of Germany in the late fall of this year, the all-out crushing of Japan much later. And as the year began, it looked as though we'd made a good bet. Mark Clark's 5th was scrambling over stubborn mountain peaks toward Rome. The 8th was marching up the Adriatic coast, past the miserable, punch-drunk, starving Italian populace. Symbolically enough, half blood-stained statues of the Lord Jesus. The Russians on the edge of the Pripyat marshes were menacing Warsaw. Adolf Hitler was becoming more mystic. In the Pacific at the year's beginning, MacArthur was running a hidden ball play, blasting at Reval, threatening Truk, and keeping the little monkeys of Otenshi Sammy the Emperor squealing and jumping every which way. The word monkeys is too cordial. For as the year opened, Mutual listeners received an elementary lesson in Japanese. It was a report from Captain Samuel Gracchio of the 4th Air Force. The captain made the never-to-be-forgotten March of Death from Bataan to San Fernando. He saw United States soldiers bayoneted, spit upon, and killed ruthlessly. After a year in a Jap prison camp, Captain Gracchio escaped from Mindanao. Still visibly shaken, the captain did his best to tell his story.
Then in groups of 100, we began the March of Death. Their way of giving us directions was to swat Americans with the butts of their rifles. And as we marched, passing Japs would throw up their hands and laugh in mockery of our surrender. It's a good thing we didn't know what was ahead of us. We marched 140 miles to San Fernando, and every mile was marked by new methods of torture and brutality. They gave us no food and no water. 19 kilometers beyond our defense lines, as we plodded along without food or water, under the grueling sun and under almost constant beatings with fists and rifle butts, we came upon hundreds of bodies of Americans and Filipinos. They had been shot or bayoneted. That far from where the fighting had taken place, the poor fellows could only have been murdered in cold blood.
Later, Captain Gracchio was questioned by Colonel Snavely of the 4th Air Force. Said Colonel Snavely,
Captain, you said something last night about one of our boys being run down by a Jap tank.
Yes, we were so weak and so sick that we just looked on in horror. The words had come down the line, the Jap sentries up ahead were striking all the boys on the head if they wore helmets. They hit them with 2x4s as they passed. Well, I threw my helmet in the ditch, but Colonel Dias didn't. They hit him and knocked him clear off the road into the ditch. I tried to help, but they pounced on me, beat me up, and forced me to go on. Japs and crooks, passing in the opposite direction, stuck out their rifle butts, clipping all the boys they could reach in the face. Then along came a Jap tank. I saw it deliberately swerve out of its course, run down an American soldier who had fallen behind a little, and crush his body into the gravel as flat as a pancake. He couldn't get out of its pathway in time. The Japs screamed and hollered with glee and spit at everyone they could in passing. It was deliberate murder, but we hadn't seen anything yet. The dysentery, diarrhea, malaria, and tropical ulcers became prevalent by the third night when we got to a place called Hermosa. That's the place where a Jap superior private, that's roughly equivalent to a corporal in our army, clubbed me across the face for no reason at all with a bamboo stick, which broke 2 of my teeth and split my mouth open. If they'd shot me, it would have been a blessing. We were starved, exhausted, dirty, crazy for a mouthful of even the filthiest water.
Here's a figure to help compute the price we've paid. Of the 22,300 Americans captured on Bataan and Corregidor, 7,700 died in the first year of their imprisonment. Said Saul Bloom of the House Foreign Affairs Committee,
You hold the rats responsible from the emperor down to the lowest ditch digger for 1,000,000 years.
The March of Death was a blow the fighting men in the Pacific arena were most anxious to return. In the air, U.S. aviators attacked Rabaul again and again. Mutual listeners heard a recording, the first of its type ever made, from inside a bombing plane over Jap territory. The next voice you hear will be that of Lieutenant Joseph E. Butler in his plane about to drop bombs on a Jap-held bridge. His flaps down, going 300 knots, the lieutenant describes the action as he goes into a dive. And as he speaks, listen for Jap anti-aircraft opening up. Having dropped his bombs, Lieutenant Butler pulls away from his target, then reports once again. He sees Japs and opens fire with his machine gun. Lieutenant Butler returned safely to his base, his mission part of the prologue to the crushing blow at the Marshall Islands that was on its way. Admiral Raymond Spruance was coming in for a payoff. On a battleship near Kwajalein in the Marshalls.
We're pretty close to those little... Condition 1?
Condition 1, sir. We're ready, sir.
Turn on the loudspeakers.
Loudspeaker, sir.
Men, in a few seconds, Mr. Sukiyaki will be directly in front of your gun. So let's play what they call Tokyo poker. To open, you have to have 2 dead Japs or better.
Admiral Spruance and his men moved into the Marshalls and knocked the Japs galley west. A sample of what it was like on those islands was heard by mutual listeners in a broadcast entitled A Night in a Foxhole, a recording that illustrated the effect of 24 hours of battle on a man. This record was made the night after the Marines came ashore by Tech Sergeants Keene Hepburn and Fred Welkin. Notice the carefree, innocent quality of this young Marine's voice when he first landed. Listen.
Just landed here about 15 minutes ago, and I don't know whether I sound scared or not, but I am. I don't notice any rifles popping or not, but there's rifles and just everything in the book is going off around this joint. Namur Island, down in the Kwajalein, and boy, this is really a hot place.